Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Welcome to Chill Out. I'm Pam Chill. I'm one of the Highland Park senior producers, and today's program is about in-home counseling for seniors. I'm very fortunate and honored to have as my guest today Eric Homer. Welcome. Welcome to my program. I've been wanting to get you on for many years, and finally, today is the day. So I'm very, very excited. We have a lot to talk about. I'm going to do a brief bio on you. Eric Homer is Clinical Director for In-Home Counseling. He's an educator, administrator, and counselor whose work is with people coping with life-challenging conditions. The people he serves are coping with difficult health concerns, the challenges of aging, poverty, inadequate housing, and disconnection from potential resources. Eric is a licensed social worker and certified elementary secondary education teacher. He has worked with these vulnerable communities for over 40 years, and locally Eric has worked at both the Highland Park Senior Center and Glenkirk in Highland Park. Before Eric was a social worker, he was a teacher, and before that an artist. Okay.
Thank you, Pam.
You're most welcome. Yes, you've done a lot of things, very important work that you've done. So let me have a brief introduction. Why are we doing counseling for seniors? I mean, I know it's a great demand for it, but the in-home counseling specifically.
Well, and if we start just with the percentage of the population that are seniors. Mm-hmm. So right now, 1 in 5 Americans is 50 and over. Within about the next 12, 13 years, 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 and over. So fully 20% of the population. And that'll continue like for the next 100 years. That seniors will always make up about 20% of the population. Now, at the same time, seniors have the highest rate of depression. And part of that is understandable, and we'll talk more about it, but there's often a series of losses as you're a senior. The old theory used to be that seniors are ready to go, that they're detached. And since then, we've now adjusted that to realize, no, they just feel pretty normal and they aren't really eager to go. Mm-hmm. And so counseling comes in when people are in pain. Mm-hmm. And so our people have our biggest diagnosis is anxiety and depression.
Okay. What were they anxious about? What to come and their
It can be both. It can be both. Most of and we'll talk a little bit about it, while they could review things that have happened in their family or even things from their own childhood, actually most of the folks that we provide counseling for are hurting right now. And usually it's actually their doctor who makes the referral. Mm-hmm. So the doctor realizes that they're depressed or anxious. What they're anxious about, and there's sort of two broad categories. One is things that are actual, like they're going to lose their house. Or they're looking at their funds and they realize they don't have enough money to pay for example, assisted living. So sometimes it's just anxious in the moment and having to do with their well-being. And there's not an easy solution as a senior. You can't run out and get a second job or a first job even and to supplement to your income. The other kind of anxiety is just a sense of dread or worrying, even if there's nothing to worry about. So we have situations where seniors do have plenty of money. Mm-hmm. They do have, their health is okay, Their home is safe, their family is nearby, and yet they feel a sense of dread, a sense of something that bothers them. And we can speculate.
They probably see it with, their friends, and then they think that maybe that will happen to them. Is that
well,
right,
what they do see, and you're touching on what they do see, is their friends getting ill. So that's one of the sadder portions of getting older, is if you live long enough, you're going to witness the loss of a lot of your people that you love. And so it can, visiting someone at the hospital or hearing their story about a health condition can get a sense of, that could happen to me. How much time do I have left? What will be the quality of my life that I have now? So some of it is if they pressed, they could say, well, I don't know how much time I have, and I worry about what's going to happen to me or whether I'll go into a nursing home. While they can name it that, more when they start counseling, they can't name why they're anxious. They just know that they're having sleep disturbances. They just know that they worry a lot. And they'll even say, I worry about stuff that's not even that important, but I worry. So some of it is just anxiety just on its own. And it doesn't, and part of the counseling is getting it to talk about it, even if we don't come up with, quote, a reason for their anxiety. Sometimes the counseling, the act of talking and talking it out, as humans, we're very verbal. And it is an amazing thing that in counseling, people experience healing just from a conversation. Now, obviously, the client does the hard work of really bringing up what's important to talk about.
I think that those are all very, very good, values that can be, you're just utilizing what the counselor can do for you, to do that. So we talked about depression, we talked about anxiety in seniors. Now, is this something new, do you think, that they've always had this ongoing, or just all the losses? I want to touch back on losses. They could be loss of a spouse, they could be loss of a home, loss of, they have a whole different environment, loss of a lot of very close dear friends. All the losses accumulate. And how does one go on, with all the losses? It could even be a loss of a pet,
Correct.
Right.
Correct. That can set people off. It's the nature of, and by the way, we do serve people that aren't seniors at our company in home counseling. So it's people that experience these same things even in their 20s or 30s or 40s. But being a senior has some very specific predictable losses. Even if we have resources, even if we have family. Some of those losses you touched on, people, for the most part, many seniors are going to lose their home. Not lose it to the bank or something like that, but just they're going to move into assisted living or into one of the, that's senior villages, if you will, subsidized or affordable senior housing, senior building housing, something like that.
Right.
Well, almost universally, those are smaller. They're a small apartment.
They have to downsize. They also have to.
So what does that mean? That means they have to get rid of a lot of furniture that they might have enjoyed, of artwork, of personal items that they're now, and the comfort of being in a larger house. Now they're in a small apartment. They'll say something like, I haven't lived in some place this small since I was in my 20s, and now and of course there's getting adjusted to the other people that live in the housing. That's not so much a loss as a challenge. So I would sort of say there's two things, losses and challenges. So the other loss, and it's predictable, is a loss of health. And just that's longevity, why it's an issue now. People are living longer. They hope that they live longer and better, and the quality of life is continued in that. But sometimes can be a challenge when you have health conditions. So, and we talked about that you may witness in friends or family members, a sister or a brother. Or even we have seniors that are taking care of their senior parent, which that's also a new phenomenon. But so the depression and anxiety sometimes is related to caring for their spouse or for their mom or dad who's in their 90s and they're in their 60s. So one is the loss of home. One is for younger seniors, it's the loss of employment. They may have worked till they were 70. They may have even worked part-time into their 70s, and then the work fades out.
What do I do with the rest of my
So
life?
right, so right, and they no longer have the status they might have had in a work environment. So one of it is employment. Along with that, there's often a loss of income, and even if they have a pension or even if they have savings, we find a phenomena, we were talking about anxiety and money, is because seniors are fearful about what expenses may come, and nursing homes are expensive, and assisted living is expensive. Thousands and thousands of dollars for both each month.
Right. Or if you want to stay in your home and you want home health care, it's very expensive.
Very expensive, just as expensive as a nursing home in the end. Although you are in your own home. And that is a growing, aging at home is a new phenomena. So more and more people are doing that. Thus, and also getting their counseling at home.
Yes, yes. Well, it's very difficult to go back on the subject there, but a lot of people have conditions and that it makes it difficult. They're on oxygen or they have difficulty with transportation, with walking.
It's actually one of the number one issues with seniors is transportation.
Yes, yes.
Is because there's Uber and stuff like that, but there hasn't been really very affordable options for seniors, and they often have let go of their car, or they've had to let go of their car. The daughter or son took the keys and said, it's not safe to have you on the street anymore. So that loss of mobility and the difficulty sometimes of finding transportation or having to ride public transportation, especially on today's a good day that's an example of it. It's very cold out.
It's
and
cold
the sidewalks
and it's
are
icy. It's very treacherous.
Right. So most seniors are going to stay in today, kind of stuff. So we see that sort of, and of course, the other very dramatic loss, and this usually impacts statistically right now, it's women, is the loss of a spouse. Is often, especially the generation of seniors we have now, the woman was often younger than her spouse, and men do not have the same health that women do, and so they have a shorter lifespan. So we've encountered that is a huge issue, becoming a widow, because you've often had to spend sometimes years driving to doctor's appointments, witnessing the love of your life, if you will, suffer and fading, and you know that it's not going to end with them living longer and longer. It's that you realize you can see the end coming. You can imagine the stress that has on the wife. And we do have the reverse. Sometimes it's a husband taking care of a wife that's fading. So we see that that's one of the most demanding experiences. And as you can see, it's one that provokes a significant amount of depression. And then in those months afterward, after they're gone. So there's bereavement. But I'm also going to add, and we see this over and over with seniors, is we kind of think, well, you'll have one loss at a time. Well, no, that's what happens. I say it's like airplanes stacked at the airport. As soon as you land one plane, there's another. So one loss, even if in counseling you take care of one loss, there's another loss that occurs. And I'll give you examples of, it would be a woman that's lost her husband. She spent months in counseling. She's dealing with that. And then her sister dies. And then now she has both losses. And then her finances are such that she has to sell the house. Or her own mobility issues. Sometimes people are in two-story houses and they can't tolerate the stairwells anymore, or things like that. So they have to move to something smaller and it's more accommodated. So all of those, we can see those losses kind of stacking up. And at the same time, their own health might have issues. Or even if they're not as mobile as they used to be, or they fatigue earlier. That's still in the context of many seniors are living longer and better, but nonetheless, something does happen to you eventually.
You just don't have the stamina, a lot of times.
Right.
Right. The energy and. Yes. So how does memory loss and dementia play with counseling? What part
Well,
does that?
cognitive impairment is what we would call memory loss. And memory programs are a big deal right now. It's a rapid expansion of that as a resource. And those are for folks that are having significant cognitive impairment. Now, most of us will not end up being cognitively impaired, but about 15% will. And some of that is severe cognitive impairment. It may fall under the umbrella of Alzheimer's. And that can be everything from very slight to dramatically, where even the person forgets their family and forgets their spouse, that kind of thing. So where that comes in counseling is we sometimes will counsel people early when they know that they're having some impairments and that they're upset about that they can see that they can't remember things as well.
Frustration, I mean.
Just their frustration. So we'll provide counseling to folks. In some cases, that person gets diagnosed as having early Alzheimer's or a dementia that's growing. That shows up with Parkinson's. Is sometimes there can be memory losses and dementia at one of the stages of Parkinson's. So we'll counsel that person. Now, the way it works in our main funding sources are Medicare and Medicaid, as well as a lot of private insurances, the supplements, the Part B supplements that people get to their Medicare. That's primarily, most of our people don't privately pay for the counseling. They use their insurance. There is a point that insurance won't pay for dementia or Alzheimer's for counseling because the person won't be seen as being able to benefit from it if they're too far gone. What often happens in that situation is we end up providing counseling for the wife or the husband because we talked earlier about how stressful it is to have an ill spouse. Now add to it that there's memory issues and that the person is requiring, you're basically providing 24-hour care.
And a lot of repetition and saying the same thing over and over again.
Right, just it has its own unique severe stresses that go on with that. So both memory, in other words, so partly I'm saying caregivers are also people who seek out counseling. Is sometimes it's not the senior themselves, it's their adult daughter or it's the husband or wife, just because their whole life has become very stressful. And again, depressing to be coping with so many things at once.
What do you do to elevate the mood of the spouse or the caregiver?
Well,
or the child, the adult child, who's obviously working
in
with
psychotherapy, there's always the notion of hope, and that is what sustains people. And so part of it is there's sort of two levels of this. One is the counseling where people can get stuff off their chest, and they can talk about the things that upset them. And sometimes that's enough that they can get perspective on it. And that they can see just that someone cares, someone has empathy for what's happening. Sometimes it will improve the communication they're having with family and with friends, and so that also helps them cope better. So one is we're helping their coping mechanisms when they're experiencing these things. The other is helping people get peace of mind so that they can enjoy what quality of life they have, even with the knowledge that life is limited. And so some of this hope is the shift for, and this is going to be an odd way to put it, is the good death. And there's a big issue with palliative care now, is getting a lot of attention, that we need to be more comfortable of talking about how do we want this final phase. So we do work with people in hospice, and we do work with people that are at the end. And part of that is, again, helping them. It's hope for peace of mind, even in the midst of distress. Because sometimes we can't make the distressing issue go away. So, but hope, we always hope, we hope that we help elevate hope and help generate hope with the person.
Absolutely. Do you ever work with people like their wishes, like their bucket list, when...
We do have one of the, besides sort of looking at getting peace of mind about what's happening in the here and now, and that's what most of the counseling is. But we do have things that people bring up as far back as their childhood, and it's an unresolved issue, and I sort of say it's like getting their emotional affairs in order, that there is some deep wounds that happened in childhood, or they were a survivor of trauma during one of the wars. We have people that have not told their family their story, and they actually don't want to tell their family their story because it's too upsetting. But to a stranger, to a counselor, they can tell that story. So some of it is taking care of stuff from the past so that they can finally set it aside.
Do you find some resistance to people who've never had counseling, that they feel that they don't need it, that
well, and we always go with it. If we contact the senior from the referral from the doctor, and it's clear that they don't want the counseling, well, we don't pursue it.
Right, you can't unless
we don't.
Unless they're cooperative to the idea, and, right?
Yeah. So some of them will give us on a trial basis. So they'll have the counselor come for 2 or 3 sessions, and then they'll either continue with the counseling, or sometimes they'll say, this isn't what I was looking for.
Right. And you have to see if it's a good fit with the counselor,
right,
too, probably.
Right.
It's like anything in life, to see if it's a good fit. Why do you think seniors need counseling? I mean, do you think they benefit a great deal from it? And who would be the type of senior who would they initiate it? I know you mentioned
we do
doctors.
have some people that call us directly, although it's usually going to be their health provider.
I see a lot of the home health care nurses I know also
right,
recommend
the home
that
care
as well.
nurses often give referrals to us. Is in terms of a type of senior, it really is all types of seniors. And in terms of what they get from it, I think with the senior phase of life really is very much about quantity of life and quality of life. And that how do we build that, and building coping mechanisms, but also come to terms with whatever we need to do to take care of ourselves during those times. In other words, we don't want a situation where not only do we know our time is limited, but we're upset all the time. That isn't how most seniors want to see the final phase of their life. I once worked with a senior who was being upset by one of the family members, and he said, I don't know if I have days, weeks, months, or years left, but I am not going to spend my time arguing with this person. And so we came up with some coping strategies, how he could set boundaries with this family member. But it's kind of along that line. It's like, I don't know how much time I have, but I certainly don't want to spend it being upset, depressed, or anxious.
I noticed with a lot of seniors, and with my mother, who's now passed, but she lived a very independent lifestyle, was an educator all her life, and then she went into assisted living. And I just wanted to say that, after about a few days, I said, well, how do you like it here? And she says, it's a lot of work. It's so much work and challenging, and a lot of, these psychological components, and, on how to relate to the people who are there, the people who are working there. It's so much involved, and I didn't realize that. How to treat everybody and how they treat you and how to interact. It's so much. She said she could write a whole book on, for people who have never been in that type of community environment, what to do, just day to day, and how it's like survival techniques, she said, of getting what you want, when you want it, and being relating to all these other people. It's very difficult. I don't know if you've noticed that, but in some of the seniors.
In sort of the marketing campaigns, they always make a deal like you're going to make all these new friends, like it's all a party. In fact, some of the ads, they're having a party.
But it's not quite that way.
It's not quite.
No.
Doesn't mean that doesn't happen.
Right.
But we've mentioned anxiety and depression, but there's also stress.
Tremendous
Even if the
amount,
person
yes.
is not anxious or not depressed, that they have extreme stress, and that is creating challenges for them to adjust to that story. So you're absolutely right. Now, in time, because it's a big shift. It's like kids going off to college.
Right.
And it has some similar elements. There's all these other people. You have to share a building with them.
Right.
You all eat together.
You all eat together. There's just the seating arrangements, and then who ordered this, and then can you pass this, and sometimes people are very gracious, and sometimes they're not.
And I think as sons and daughters, we sometimes will say that, oh, that's so trivial that you're not getting along with someone at the table. And I will absolutely tell you, for some seniors, they are obsessed with someone that they feel is hurting them, that sits at their table for a meal. And it actually becomes a big deal. And
I know. I used to hear that. Well, luckily, they didn't have assigned seating. And
open seating, that was partly why they've done that.
Right, absolutely. And I have to say that's the best thing that they can do is have open seating and not assigned seating.
Right.
Yes.
But even the adjustments to living in one of those settings, to us as sons and daughters, it may seem like, well, that's not that important, that they scheduled something and then they canceled it at the last minute. But for the senior, it's now their world. Mm-hmm. And plus, also, they can be, we can say sometimes the anxiety, they can get attached to something that isn't that big of a deal, but it gives them something, again, to worry about or be anxious about. So it's a little bit of both. The anxiety would be there anyway, but because they canceled the program today, now I'm really upset.
Or the other thing, too, with my mom, it was the hairdresser couldn't take me. What am I going to do now?
Right.
Tears would come down her face. It was so sad, because everybody else got their hair done, and that's how it is in assisted living. So, not the nursing home environment, but assisted living. So I just wanted to. We have a little bit of time, but I wanted to say, go back to creating hope when there's not a lot of hope. To create hope. That is quite a challenge.
That is quite a challenge, and some of it's all specific to that story. So when we have ones, like I said, we work with people that are explicitly in hospice, and so they know that their time is significantly limited. Then what we really do is work with them and their family to have some comfort in the midst of loss. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very hard. That's very hard for any of us to have that sort of sense of self and while we're actively coping, and sometimes there's physical pain as well. And so the person in those cases, it's sometimes coming up with very specific, just helping the person cope with pain, cope with being on the medications, and then working with the family to how do we keep this a high quality of life. Mm-hmm. So that we're being respectful of the senior. We're getting better at this.
And also going by their wishes.
Right.
Yes, that's so important.
Right.
Because sometimes, a lot of physicians and a lot of hospital administrators want to change their wishes. And they'll come to a loved one or they'll come to them themselves, while they do have the capacity to make a decision. And I always say to myself, should it be done or should it not be done? If these were the directives and they're written down directives, and I know circumstances may change, but you kind of want to go with people wanted when they were able to make that decision.
Right.
So.
And that's why I mentioned palliative care earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the strengths of that, is that they really have the senior articulate very specifically what kind of care or what level of treatment they want. Especially usually with palliative care, a life-threatening illness has already been identified. And so then they'll describe how they want, if you will, how they want this story to be. It's their story, and they get to write it.
Very good. We're going to basically just end on that. Just really quickly, how would they find a counselor for you?
So for us, it is, we had posted our contact number.
Yes, we did.
So that's our intake line, as you just choose option 1.
Okay.
And we do provide counselors all the way from the Wisconsin border down through Chicago.
So I just want to thank you so much, Eric Homer, for being on the program today and talking about in-home counseling for seniors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very informative, and a lot of people will benefit by this.